Jamin AI. Jamin AI.
Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at how words can get twisted, and we're going to be focusing on the words of important figures and how they can be used in ways they were never intended. So to kick things off, we're diving into a blog post by Jamin Bradley.
Okay.
Now, he's a pastor theologian, and he shared this story that I thought was really fascinating.
Okay.
He wrote about how he had posted something on social media about the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And it was a critical post.
Right.
And he was surprised to find that a Trump supporter had actually liked the post.
Interesting.
So it kind of made him think about how, even when you think you're being clear,
yeah.
your message can still be totally misconstrued.
Yeah. Bradley's story really speaks to, I think, a much larger phenomenon. And, we see this all the time where historical figures, especially people who can no longer speak for themselves, get quoted in ways that I think totally misrepresent their actual beliefs. It's like their words are taken out of context and they're turned into weapons to support, whatever the agenda might be.
Right. So it's not just about misinterpreting a tweet.
Yeah.
In the heat of the moment.
Right.
It's like actually distorting someone's legacy.
Exactly. And it's especially easy to do when you don't have that deep understanding of a person's life.
Right.
Their values, the historical context that they lived in. It's like Bradley says, he uses this great analogy from the movie The Book of Eli.
Okay.
And he says, if you can convince people that certain words came from a holy book, they'll just blindly follow.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Whatever interpretation you feed them.
It makes me wonder if this happens more often than we realize.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, are there other examples of this kind of hijacking of words?
Oh, yeah.
Besides what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah. I mean, you think about even figures like Jesus, right? Whose teachings are centered on love and compassion. But how many times have we seen his words twisted to justify acts of violence or discrimination? Or oppression, It just underscores how important it is to study the person behind the words, not just the words themselves.
Okay, so let's bring this back to Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Okay.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar with him, could you give us a little background?
Sure. So Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor and a theologian, and he was living in Germany during the rise of Nazi Germany. And he became a very vocal critic of the regime, particularly their persecution of Jews and their totalitarian ideology. And eventually he was arrested and executed for his resistance activities.
Right. And so Bradley is focusing on how Eric Metaxas, who's a contemporary conservative author, has been portraying Bonhoeffer. And he seems a little concerned that Metaxas might be misrepresenting Bonhoeffer's message.
Yeah, and Bradley's not alone in this.
Okay.
A lot of Bonhoeffer scholars have been critical of Metaxas's interpretation.
Arguing that it's an attempt to kind of mold Bonhoeffer into a figure that aligns with modern-day right-wing ideologies.
Interesting.
Essentially, they're saying that Metaxas is twisting Bonhoeffer's message to fit his a specific political agenda.
Now, here's where it gets interesting, because Bradley actually mentions that he read Metaxas's book.
Okay.
And he came away with a pretty negative view of Donald Trump.
Interesting.
Which seems like the opposite of what Metaxas intended.
Yeah.
So how is it that two people can read the same text and come to such different conclusions?
I think that paradox speaks volumes about how our pre-existing beliefs and biases really influence how we interpret things. We tend to see what we want to see, even if it means kind of twisting the original meaning.
Right. It's almost like we need to approach information, especially about historical figures, with a critical eye.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like a lot of people believe that Metaxas is distorting Bonhoeffer's message.
Is there anyone else who has weighed in on this?
Well, there's Stephen R. Haynes. He's a prominent Bonhoeffer scholar.
Okay.
He actually wrote a pretty scathing letter.
Oh, wow.
Directly addressing Metaxas's portrayal of Bonhoeffer. And he argues that Bonhoeffer, who deeply valued human dignity and social justice, would have found a lot of Trump's views and actions repulsive.
Wow.
He even says that Bonhoeffer would have likely viewed Trump with contempt.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is.
But if Metaxas's interpretation is so far off, why are people drawn to it?
It's a complex issue, but I think part of it might be the appeal of a simple narrative.
Okay.
People are often drawn to clear-cut heroes and villains.
Right.
And it can be tempting to fit historical figures into these categories.
Yeah.
But the problem is that kind of oversimplification can lead to a distorted understanding of their true beliefs.
So it's almost more appealing for some people to think of Bonhoeffer as this staunch conservative figure.
Yeah, perhaps it aligns more comfortably. Yeah.
With their existing worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And it provides a sense of historical validation for their beliefs.
Right. But as we've been discussing,
Yeah.
that kind of selective interpretation ignores the complexities
Absolutely.
of Bonhoeffer's life and thought.
It does.
Okay, so we've talked about experts and scholars who have critiqued Metaxas's take on Bonhoeffer.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those closest to Bonhoeffer?
Right.
Did his family have anything to say about this?
They did.
Okay.
Bonhoeffer's family actually issued a very powerful statement.
Oh, wow.
Condemning the use of his legacy by right-wing extremists.
Mm.
And they emphasized that Bonhoeffer was a peace-loving humanitarian.
Right.
And that he would have vehemently condemned the hate and the violence that these groups espouse.
So they're basically saying, he would not have supported these extremist viewpoints.
Yeah, they insist that his message was one of love, reconciliation, and standing up against injustice, not promoting division and extremism.
Right. And they urge people to really engage directly with Bonhoeffer's writings. Yeah. Rather than relying on these interpretations that distort his true message.
It's almost like if you really want to know somebody, you talk to their family.
Exactly.
You talk to their friends.
Yeah.
The people who knew them best.
Exactly.
You don't just rely on some stranger's account of who they were.
That's right.
It highlights the importance of going to the source, seeking out primary materials, and forming our own informed opinions.
That's right.
It's like Bradley said, know your heroes, lest you read the wrong emoji into their words.
Oh, yes.
I love that quote. It's so important to understand the context, the nuances, the full picture.
Exactly. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is to help you develop the tools to critically analyze information and avoid falling into these traps of misinterpretation.
Mm-hmm. So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm starting to see how crucial it is to approach information with a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to dig deeper.
Absolutely.
It's not just about what's being said, but it's about who's saying it.
That's right.
And why.
Exactly. It's easy to think that we understand somebody just because we admire them.
Yeah.
But sometimes that can actually lead us to projecting our own beliefs onto them instead of really grappling with their ideas in a genuine way.
It's like thinking, your favorite musician's entire life story.
Right.
Just from listening to their hit songs.
Right.
There's so much more depth to discover when you actually dive into their full discography.
Absolutely.
And you understand the experiences that shaped their music.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it applies to historical figures, too. We can't just reduce them to catchy quotes or these oversimplified narratives. To truly understand them, we need to engage with their work in a thoughtful and respectful way. Considering the complexities of their lives and the times that they lived in.
You mentioned earlier that even Jesus has been misquoted.
Right.
Or justify actions he would have opposed.
Yeah.
What's an example of that?
Well, take the concept of turning the other cheek.
Okay.
Some people have interpreted that as a call for passive submission to violence.
Okay.
But when you actually look at the passage in its full context, Jesus is actually speaking out against a system of retaliatory justice. He's advocating for a radical break from this cycle of violence.
Right. So it's not about just being a doormat.
Exactly.
It's about challenging injustice in a way that breaks that cycle.
Exactly. And that kind of nuanced understanding is what gets lost when we isolate quotes or we ignore the historical context.
So bringing this back to Bonhoeffer, what are some concrete examples of how his message has been distorted?
Well, one example is the use of Bonhoeffer's concept of cheap grace.
Okay.
Now, this idea, which critiques a superficial understanding of God's forgiveness, has been twisted by some to argue against things like social welfare programs. They claim that, providing assistance enables sin and undermines personal responsibility.
So they're taking his critique of, complacency within the church.
Right.
And applying it to completely different social and political issues.
Exactly. It's a classic example of taking words out of context and bending them to fit a predetermined agenda.
If someone wants to get a more accurate understanding of Bonhoeffer, where should they start?
Well, as Bonhoeffer's family urged, the best place to start is with his own writings.
Okay.
Read his letters from prison, his theological works like The Cost of Discipleship.
Okay.
Explore the resources available from reputable Bonhoeffer scholars.
So go to the source.
Yeah.
Instead of getting your news from a secondhand account.
Precisely.
You're more likely to get the full story that way.
Yeah. And don't limit yourself to just Bonhoeffer.
Okay.
This principle really applies to any historical figure or thinker that you want to understand.
Right.
Go to the primary sources. Consider the historical context. Engage with multiple perspectives. Don't just settle for sound bites or surface-level interpretations.
This all ties back to that idea of being an active participant in the process of understanding.
Yes.
We can't just passively absorb information and assume we've got it all figured out.
Absolutely. It's about actively wrestling with ideas.
Right.
Questioning, agreeing, disagreeing, and ultimately forming your own informed opinion.
Right. It's a dynamic process.
It is.
It's not a static one.
Not at all.
It seems like humility plays a big role in this as well.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
Yes.
And being open to having our perspectives challenged.
Humility is crucial. It's acknowledging that our understanding is always evolving and that we can learn from others.
Right.
Even those we disagree with.
Because if we go into it thinking we already know everything,
right,
then we're not really open to learning.
Exactly. We become closed off to new insights.
Right.
And I think more vulnerable to manipulation.
Right.
We might cling to interpretations that just confirm our existing biases, even if they're inaccurate.
This reminds me of something Bradley said about how deeply knowing C.S. Lewis's work helps him spot misinterpretations.
Right.
It's like having a finely tuned ear for a particular musical artist. The more familiar you become with their style, the easier it is to recognize a fake.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Developing that deep understanding of a thinker's work allows you to discern when their ideas are being misrepresented or taken out of context.
So we've been talking about the dangers of misinterpreting others' words. But what about our own responsibility when we share information?
That's a great point. We need to be mindful of the context.
Right.
Double check our sources. Avoid spreading misinformation, especially in today's digital landscape where information travels so quickly.
It's about being thoughtful and responsible.
Absolutely.
With the information we share.
Yes, and that includes being transparent about our own biases and being willing to correct misinformation.
Right.
If we discover that we've shared something inaccurate.
So we have a responsibility both as consumers and as producers of information.
Exactly.
We need to be critical of what we take in and mindful of what we put out into the world.
It's about being active participants in the marketplace of ideas.
Right.
Not passive bystanders.
This has been really eye-opening.
Good.
I'm starting to see how easily words can be manipulated.
Yeah.
And how important it is to approach information with a critical and discerning mind.
Absolutely.
As we move into the final part of our deep dive, what are some key questions we should be asking ourselves to make sure we're not falling into these traps of misinterpretation?
Yeah.
It's so easy to just kind of go with the flow of popular opinion.
Right.
Especially with how much information is out there these days.
Absolutely.
But as we've been talking about, it's really taking that extra step to actually examine our beliefs and dig into the source material ourselves.
Yeah.
That's what separates, truly understanding something from just blindly accepting what we hear.
Absolutely. It's not always easy, though, right?
Right. Yeah.
It takes effort, critical thinking, and as we've talked about, a healthy dose of humility.
Thinking back to Bradley's story about his Trump-supporting friend liking his post.
Right.
It really struck me because it would have been so easy to assume that they were on the same page.
Totally.
About, the events of January 6th.
Right.
And for those who might not know, that was when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building. But Bradley realized that there was a whole other interpretation at play.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we shouldn't just assume we know what someone means, especially when it comes to these complex or sensitive topics.
Right.
It's really taking that time to understand their perspective, even if it's completely different from our own.
It's like the saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Exactly.
It's about listening, trying to see things from their point of view.
And that takes open-mindedness, empathy, a willingness to engage in dialogue, even when we disagree.
This makes me think about the responsibility we have not just as consumers of information, but as creators of it as well.
That's huge.
Because every time we share a quote
right.
or post an article or express an opinion online, we're contributing to this massive sea of information.
Absolutely.
It's on us to make sure we're doing it responsibly.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
We need to be mindful of context.
Yeah.
Double check our sources.
Yeah.
Avoid spreading misinformation or twisting someone's word to fit our own agenda.
It's like being handed a megaphone.
Yes.
We need to use it wisely.
Precisely. It's about thinking critically about what we're sharing, fact-checking information.
Yeah.
Being transparent about our own biases.
And being willing to admit when we're wrong.
Yeah.
Correct misinformation. Have productive conversations with people who have different viewpoints.
Absolutely. Because in the end, we're all in this together.
Right.
Trying to understand this complex world.
Bradley ends his blog post with this great line. He says, "Know your heroes lest you read the wrong emoji into their words."
I love that.
Such a good point. We need to put in the time and the effort to really understand the people and ideas that are important to us.
It's a powerful reminder that true understanding requires more than just skimming the surface.
Right.
It means digging deeper.
Yeah.
Asking questions. Challenging our own assumptions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of misinterpreted words and hijacked meanings, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
Be curious, be skeptical, and be humble. Don't take anything at face value.
Right.
Dig deeper, ask questions, and be open to changing your mind.
It's about recognizing that the pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing journey.
Yes.
It's not a destination.
That's not a destination.
And the more informed we are as individuals, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this complex world and have productive conversations with each other.
Well said. And remember, it's okay to change your mind as you learn new things. That's all part of the journey.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into how words can get hijacked. We hope this encourages you to think critically about the information you encounter and to always be on the lookout for those misinterpreted meanings. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic.
We told you this was coming, but not the way you heard. You thought it was a fist raised, not a troubled word. Bonhoeffer, Jesus, they echo still. Not to wield as weapons, but for peace to build. When words are hijacked, twisted and turned, what was meant for healing becomes something burned. Oh, heroes and saints don't fight the same fight. If we read the wrong emoji, we blur wrong from right. When words are hijacked, twisted and turned, what was meant for healing becomes something burned. Oh, heroes and saints don't fight the same fight. If we read the wrong emoji, we blur wrong from right. Do you see the man? Would he speak those words with the sword you plan? If love was his armor, if peace was his way, why let hate steal his words away? When words are hijacked, twisted and turned, what was meant for healing becomes something burned. Oh, heroes and saints don't fight the same fight. If we read the wrong emoji, we blur wrong from right. From wrong from right. When words are hijacked, twisted and turned, what was meant for healing becomes something burned. Oh, heroes and saints don't fight the same fight. If we read the wrong emoji, we blur wrong from right. So if you wanna know Bonhoeffer, know him whole. Don't twist his words to match your goal. And if you wanna know Jesus, walk his road. Peace and love, his heavy load. Truth's in the legacy, not in the lies. Not in fists raised high, but in open skies. Know your heroes, know their way, or you'll read the wrong meaning in the words they say. If we read the wrong emoji, we blur wrong from right.